Over the past few years, the biggest buzz in the automotive industry has been around electric motoring. What does that quantify? Well, due to the emissions, due to the air pollution, due to the climate change, various governments, regulatory bodies have been pushing towards more adaptation of electric vehicles. It has happened well in some countries, it hasn't happened that well in other countries. But slowly the electric vehicles are making inroads into India. We've seen many electric vehicles already being sold. You see two-wheelers, you see three-wheelers, but there are also now a few passenger vehicle options, cars that is. This started with the Reva and then it led on to other cars like the Hyundai Kona, the MG ZS EV. But what we have here today is the first luxury pure electric car available in India, and it's the Mercedes-Benz EQC. We are driving it today here around Delhi NCR and at ICAT's testing facility to get a taste of what full electric luxury motoring feels like, and we give you an opinion of what you can expect from the EQC. Now when it comes to design, if you look at the EQC in profile, you'll think that it's just a GLC with different wheels. Well, you wouldn't be very far off the mark. This is a car based on the same platform as the GLC. It's the same size, but there are substantial differences. You see, with the lack of an internal combustion engine, designers get to design cars with very different front ends, rear ends, and they're allowed a lot more freedom to explore. What do I mean by that? Well, you see, the cooling requirements of a battery-powered electric vehicle are very different to the cooling requirements of a car with an internal combustion engine. So you get these big grills, you get bumpers with not too many vents, because the designers can work more towards the aerodynamic profile of the car. And what you get with the EQC, because of the aerodynamic work that the designers and engineers have done, is a very low drag coefficient, 0.27, which means that the EQC cuts through the air very quickly. It's slightly more efficient. The noise inside the cabin is also reduced. Also, with the electric range being very different, Mercedes has definitely tried to give the EQC a very different look, which is more apparent in the wheels, like I mentioned before, and the front and the rear end. So you get these different headlights. You'll also see blue elements. These are signature token elements that will be in the EQ line of Mercedes cars. So you get that at the front. You can also see them in the wheels. You can see it in the EQC badging. And I think that's interesting because it makes the EQC stand out and instantly recognizable. At the rear also is a very nice touch, which I'll show you right now. At the rear, what I really like is this big tail light. It spreads across the whole rear panel. The tail lights actually do curve into the rear quarter panels, and I think that's a very distinctive touch. It makes the EQC stand out, and yes, it retains the overall design that Mercedes has on its SUV range right now, but with a distinctive front end, rear end, different badging on the front fenders, on the rear, and different wheels. You will definitely register the EQC and not confuse it for anything else in the Mercedes product lineup. Now, when you open the engine bay of the EQC, well, you know, that's a bit of a misnomer considering the EQC doesn't have an engine. What you get to see are the electric motors. The EQC has electric motors at the front, at the rear, which makes it an all-wheel drive vehicle. The battery, of course, is sandwiched within the wheelbase very low down, which gives it an excellent center of gravity. It's quite low, but the battery at 80 kilowatt hours is quite substantial, and it weighs a lot. At over 650 kilos, there's a lot of weight that battery contains. Of course, with modern battery propulsion systems, with the electric motors, you also need cooling. So there's a cooling system that runs all across both the electric motors at the front and the rear, and the battery pack, and the control unit of all this, which is what keeps the car running. So to keep all that cool is a big task, and that's taken care of by the cooling system. You might ask what these orange cables are. Well, you see, the EQC is a high voltage system. It's powered by a high voltage system over 400 volts, and anything over 60 volts is high voltage, and this orange cabling is meant to determine that. Now, if you're used to Mercedes interiors, the EQC for you will feel a mixed bag. Why do I say a mixed bag? Well, certain aspects of the interior feel very familiar. The steering wheel, the touchscreen, and the instrument cluster display, the old-fashioned, now this is in Mercedes parlance, these are the old-fashioned stocks. The center console here in the dash, the UX, all that is traditional new generation Mercedes. Works very well, and I have to say, like I've said in my earlier videos of the GLE and the GLS, that the whole UX, the design, everything feels rather futuristic, which suits a car like the EQC with its fully electric powertrain quite well. But there are other elements of the EQC's interiors which I really like this extended dash. It's almost like it's out of a boat. You've got these fins here that run all across the dash. You've got this gold detailing on the air vents. The air vents themselves are a different design. The start-stop button is very differently positioned, and this metal finish, all this feels rather premium, and I have to say it makes a great difference to traditional Mercedes SUV interiors, and I quite like what I see in the EQC. Space-wise also, it's quite nice. 4 adults will fit quite comfortably. The rear seat is not the biggest. Remember, this is based in the GLC, but 4 adults should not be a problem. The transmission tunnel though, that makes fitting a 5th adult a difficult process, and I think the middle seat in the rear row is suited mainly to children. The boot space is also quite good, as you would imagine. So from a perspective of practicality, I think the EQC does quite well, and even from a design element, I think with the new dash, with this detailing, with the detailing around the fins, I think that works really well for the EQC, and I quite like it. Now, one of the first questions I always get when I talk about electric cars is range and charging. So with its 80 kilowatt hour battery, the EQC is claimed in the NEDC test cycle to have a range on a single charge of over 450 kilometers. Now, other than the range, the other question is charging time. Well, you see, the Mercedes EQC can be charged 3 ways. One is with the portable charger, which will take you a long 21 hours to charge from 10 to 100%. The dealer will also give you an AC wall box that will do that charging in 10 hours. Whereas if you have access to a DC fast charger, maybe there's a charging point around you, maybe you install one at one of your premises, you can do this in 90 minutes. So depending on which charger you have access to, you can recharge the EQC from between 21 hours to 90 minutes. Now, we've seen how the EQC is different to Mercedes' conventional ICE powered cars, but how does it feel to drive? Is it very different from a typical ICE product? Is it substantially different? Is it something that you will notice? Yes, you will. So the first impression that you get in the EQC, especially because it's so refined, is that of eerie quietness. There's no engine noise to speak of. Even when you're really pushing the car, there's a little bit of sort of electric whine, motor whine that you can hear, but it's very, very faint. So it really makes the refinement of the car stand out. It makes the music sound better, and if you're used to slightly loud ICE cars, you might find it slightly unsettling, but in a good way. I think that refinement, that progression there is something that's quite noticeable and quite good, and it makes driving or sitting in the EQC slightly more comfortable. The other thing that really impresses you, and I think that's a bigger factor than even the refinement, is the instant power delivery. Now, I've told you the battery is 80 kilowatt hours, but with the motors front and rear, it produces 408 horsepower, 760 Nm, which is a lot of torque. But the biggest thing is not just the torque, it's the way the power is delivered. Because it's an electric motor, full torque is available from 0 RPM. So if I need to go fast or get to a gap in traffic, all I have to do is this. And as you can see from our cameraman's reaction, that's how fast it goes. It literally pins you back in your seat. 0 to 100 comes up in just 5.1 seconds. You can get to very silly 3-digit speeds in the EQC without even trying. And I have to say, if you're going through traffic, or if you're even on the highway and you have a little bit of traffic that you have to weave through, if you have to get some quick gaps, I don't think there's any current powertrain that's more impressive than an electric one in doing that, especially something as refined as the EQC. Now, the range is also another matter. It's great fun to be pushing the car, to be getting this instant burst of acceleration, but obviously that hurts your driving range on single charge. But realistically speaking, we've driven the car now for about 150 kilometers, and I have to say, unlike a few other products, the Mercedes is predictive. The ECU prediction on how much your charge is going to get you the distance is quite accurate. We started today at about 350 odd kilometers. The battery is almost full. Now we've driven about 150, it's down to 200 kilometers. So I think that's quite reliable. In some cars that can be a little off, but that obviously is not the case. Other than the acceleration, the quietness, there's another party trick to driving the EQC, which is quite fun, especially you're the kind who likes to sort of have a challenge on their drive. The regeneration, you see, all electrics and now a lot of ICE engines also, feature battery regeneration. What does that do? Well, every time you apply the brakes, it uses the kinetic energy to charge the battery. Now that of course is very important in electric vehicle, because that can easily sort of increase your range by a few kilometers based on your driving style, and you can vary that in the EQC using the steering mounted paddle shifters. If you go the minus mode, you can go into D minus and D double minus. What that does is makes the kinetic energy, the recuperation, very strong. So as long as you're in the accelerator, the car will either maintain the speed or accelerating depending on how much input you're giving. But the minute you let it off, it automatically starts braking to charge the battery even more aggressively. What that does in traffic is makes it a fun exercise, that in D minus or in D double minus, you can actually make the EQC a single pedal car, which means because the braking action is so strong, the minute you leave the accelerator, I actually don't even use the brake pedal. I just use the accelerator and lifting my foot off to regulate my braking, and it makes for a great sort of traffic fun game to keep yourself engaged. Also increases your driving range, which is a great bonus. But if that aggressive braking action is something you're not that familiar, you're not that happy with, you can always put it into D auto or D plus, which decreases that braking effect, and you can drive it normally like you do, two pedals, using your right foot for the throttle, left foot for the brake, and get along driving like you would drive a normal ICE car. There are two things with the EQC that would be major factors. One, of course, will be the price. Priced at about $70,000 in the US, so you can expect it to be around the crore rupee mark, maybe a bit more, considering it will be a CBU and it will be a small volume product from Mercedes. So obviously that's one factor. But the other being that you would have to ensure, the Indian government keeps talking about how we'll bring up electric charging infrastructure, but we have very little to show on ground. So whatever major charging is going to happen if you happen to buy the EQC will have to be done either at your house or office. So those are two things to take care of. But in regular driving, if your commute is mainly from office to home, maybe a few errands here or there, in my commute, which is about 35 kilometers a day, I can easily use the EQC the whole week and only charge it over the weekend. I can even take a long trip from Delhi to Jaipur, charge the car in Jaipur overnight or maybe a day and then drive back. So practicality wise, with over 350 kilometers of range on a single charge in realistic conditions, I think the EQC makes a great case. The only problem being at the price it will be offered in India, it will remain a very niche product.